Hey guys, Bump here, bringing you this rank 1 PvE guide for World of Warcraft. Today we'll discuss what you can do and other various factors that essentially contribute to getting the best logs possible and eventually getting rank 1. Currently I'm rank 2 for all Unholy DKs in the current raid, but I was rank 1 last week, so it's a bit back and forth there. For you guys who don't know, rank 1 all-stars means that on average you do essentially rank highest when you look at all bosses in total. So you don't need to be rank 1 on every boss, but if you take a total across all of them, you get lots of points to add up, and whoever gets the most points gets the rank 1 title. Right, so for this video I will start out talking about kind of my approach and how to maximize my damage and essentially optimize the probability that I get a good log on every single boss. We'll also cover kind of the things that I cannot change, things that are associated with your raid, stuff that you can control really, that will help you also getting a good pass. And then we'll talk a little bit about statistics and essentially how you need to play in order to maximize the probability of getting a rank 1, right? Anyway, to start with, let's talk about rotation, and I feel like this does apply to most classes. Obviously, I do play Unholy, so it's going to be biased towards that, but I feel like you can use these kind of ideas to influence your own gameplay to improve on whatever class you play, right? First topic I wanted to cover here is pre-planning your GCDs, and this is an important factor. I have some gameplay back here, you can see me doing it. Essentially, what this means that after you press an ability, you want to spam the next ability you're going to press, right? So after you use an ability, you essentially pre-plan the next one you want to use and you just splash that button. What this does is effectively use as much of your GCD as possible, right? If you don't do this, what happens is you're going to get a small delay between each ability, which adds up over a fight. And it means that if you compare someone that does this smashing button, right, pre-planning, they're going to use much more abilities than you and do much more damage. And this is like a very fundamental aspect of doing DPS, which applies to every class out there. On top of this, obviously, you need to know how to do your proper rotation, right? I feel like this is kind of the obvious aspect. You need to play the spec optimally, which it's related to how you use your priority. Like the rotation has a priority. Generally, for me personally, this means that I'm a class discords, continuously discuss the priority, and also work with simulation craft to understand what the optimal priority should be. But it pretty much speaks for itself that play it properly. That's a big part of it, yeah. And it's something that, yeah, it's a lot about practice, right? As well as being up to date with the community and understanding what's the current best way of playing your class. Now, another factor which I think matters a lot is pre-planning your CD usage. To really optimize your DPS, you need to really think about when to use your cooldowns ahead of time. I do look at quite a lot of logs, and I do look at logs that are very high, but not quite, rank 10. And I quite often see that the cooldowns are not used on time every time, right? The ideal case is to look at your counter and figure out exactly when your cooldown should align in that fight. And every time you do that fight, you use the cooldowns at the exact same time, right? So you look at our counter, for instance, Unholy, and we look at Terrors. It's quite a simple one. You know that you can use every cooldown pool. You're going to use Blight and DT after 45 seconds, Blight, DT, and all assault after 1 minute 30, and so on and so on. And it's really important that 10 seconds before your cooldowns come up, you recognize that, and you think, okay, in 10 seconds I'm going to use my cooldowns there, and you immediately do use them when they come up. I think it's a very important thing, because reacting to when your cooldowns show up is very different to planning them ahead of time, and you will see that your DPS increases when you're able to pre-plan them, because you get much better consistency overall, right? There's not going to be one pool where you kind of misusing cooldowns, another one where you use them properly. If you pre-plan them every time, it's going to be the same thing in every pool. this brings me to the next topic, practice consistency. So really, really crucial part about logging high consistently. You want to make sure that every single time you pull a boss, you do the exact same thing. You don't want a case where, 1 in 10, you get a good pull, right? And you have the potential of getting a great log. It's going to be really unlikely that 1 in 10 is going to be the actual pull you kill the boss. Whereas if you practice consistency and do the exact same thing every time, 9 out of 10 pulls will be one which you get a good log, right? And the probability of actually getting a rank 1 or top rank 10, something along those lines, is going to be 9 times higher. This is also related, like, I like to view every fight as a choreography that I practice, so that my movement, my ability usage, my CDs, everything is exactly the same every time I do that boss. And it just means that my DPS is much more consistent and increases my probability of getting a good log. I will get to this a bit later when I talk about DPS distribution and so on, but I think it's really important to emphasize practice consistency, and you will see that you will on average get much more DPS. Now, those are all the topics that I kind of think about for my personal playstyle and how I look at each boss and kind of figure out how to play. Let's talk about the things you cannot really influence, but still will have a very big impact on your pass. First of all, gear. This is quite an obvious one. If you have higher gear, you will do more DPS on average, and it's going to be much more likely that you get a good log. For instance, I have like 417 eye level at the moment, and I have really good optimized gear. And this essentially makes it so that I have a much higher likelihood of getting a good pass. Because just if I compare to someone that's 7 eye level lower than me, if we play equally well, I will just on average do more DPS. That's just how it is, right? Relative to that, this means that it's generally a good idea to be in a good guild, because you're going to kill more mythic bosses, get more gear, which is going to give you a high eye level on average, right? We also have kill timers being a significant factor when it comes to your DPS in every given fight. Shorter kill timers are highly correlated to higher DPS, generally because that first initial burst window, usually with Bloodlust, is going to give you very high DPS throughput, and the closer you finish the fight to that point, the higher DPS is going to be. Also, for some classes, Unholy is a good example here. You have very big burst windows coming throughout the fight. So Frost is every 3 minutes. That means that if you kill the boss just after one of those burst windows, it's going to be much higher DPS than killing it just before. Like if you kill a boss at 6:30, that's great for Unholy. 5:30, not so much. Furthermore, externals matter. We have Power Infusion, which is a very strong cooldown specifically for Unholy, and not getting it is going to make it much more difficult to actually getting a good pass. It's like a 12% overall DPS upgrade for Unholy, so it's a huge difference whether or not you get it or you don't. This does change depending on spec. Like Unholy, pretty much all the high passes does have Power Infusion because it's quite standard to use it on Unholy, versus other specs that doesn't get it that often, which means that it's not as much of a requirement to get a high pass because not all the high passes have it in a sense. Finally, the spec popularity actually matters. So if you play a very popular spec, which is performing very well, it's going to be much more difficult to get a good pass. And that's generally because good players that really look for that top performance are likely to swap over to that spec, which means that the kind of high passes with good players, with good gear, all that kind of thing is going to be much more populated, and thus going to make it more difficult for you to get a high pass. If you play a very unpopular spec, people are less likely to have good gear on average, and if you don't have, playing a high mythic guild, lots of gear, it's going to be much more easy to compete against them. Now, that's kind of like what you can do to affect your DPS and external factors that influence it as well. I do want to cover a little bit about probability theory here and like how it makes sense in my mind getting a rank 1 pass, for instance, and what you can do to increase the likelihood of getting it. So if you do if you encounter a boss, right, and you go for 1000 kills, right, your DPS is going to look like a normal distribution essentially. So majority of cases is going to be somewhere in the middle, right? Sometimes you're going to be very, very lucky and get a really high DPS number. Sometimes you're going to be very unlucky and get a very low one, right? Now you can view this distribution as kind of like having a mark where you have rank 1 DPS, right? Generally, that's going to be quite far to the right, so you're going to have to be quite lucky to get a very good log so that gets you rank 1. Now, the probability of getting to right that mark is essentially the area under that curve over there. And I just want to highlight a principle here of increasing your average DPS and how that affects the likelihood of getting a rank 1 pass, right? So let's say you have a normal scenario where there's a 1% probability of getting a rank 1 pass, right? Based on how much you do damage on average, yeah? If you move your average DPS only slightly to the right, that's going to increase the area to the right of that rank 1 point significantly. Like, increase your DPS by 5%, it might, increase the likelihood of getting a rank 1 pass by a factor of 10, right? It's really not proportional. This means that what I discussed earlier, right? Getting a very consistent damage profile, which essentially means that you move the average to the right, significantly increases the likelihood of you getting a rank 1. Furthermore, everything else we discussed here, like gear, kill time, externals, playing properly, all those will move your probability distribution to the right, which means that the likelihood of getting a rank 1 pass is much, much higher. For instance, for me, I have very good gear, good kill timers. I feel like I play my rotation quite properly and normally. And that just means that my average DPS is really high and my likelihood of getting a rank 1 is also very high. Does playing consistently means that on most bosses, I will get a good log and therefore I get a good average getting me that rank 1 overall. And I think that's the general aim here. Consistency gives you good passes on average, which is going to just increase your overall rank. I think that's the main topic here. Anyway, do let me know what you thought about this video down in the comments. Leave me an upvote, downvote, depending on what you thought about it. Consider subscribing if you want to see more of my content. And do hook me up on Discord if you have any questions at all. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Bye bye.